So I think I'm finally ready to give the Wandering Star Tarot a little bit of a trim. Hello, it's Dawn Michelle from Boho Tarot and welcome to another mod with me. Today I am going to be taking off the borders on the Wandering Star Tarot. Now this is a deck that I've been using all month, and I've done a video on it, a walkthrough if you're interested. I did that at the beginning of the month, even though it didn't come out for a little bit. So I've been using this deck all month. These are the extra cards, which I do quite like. I just don't keep in my deck, but I have actually used them. I did a little just kind of yes or no check-in on something the other day, and I actually pulled these cards out and I used them. So I do want to make sure that they get a trim as well because I want them to fit with the rest of the deck. So I love working with this deck. I've really enjoyed working with it all month long. It's definitely one that I am going to be continuing to work with, I think, in my practice. And I'll definitely talk about that more in my monthly reflection. But here's the thing. This deck is just like, it's chunky. It's a pretty big chunk. Like here's the Deviant Moon Tarot in its box and everything. And you can see that it's still like box and all, this is a chunky deck. I would have to take a good section of the cards out to get it kind of normal tarot width. And I have small hands, and so that makes working with a deck challenging for me when it's thick and chunky and it's slightly hard for me to get my hands around. Now I can get my hands around this deck and I can shuffle it, as you can see, but it's just a bit uncomfortable, and I want to be able to work with my decks, and I want it to be a comfortable, enjoyable experience when I do. So a lot of the times when I trim a border off a deck, it's often to make it smaller. I mean, a lot of times it's because I'm like, oh, it would look better borderless or whatever. I don't mind the borders on this deck. I actually think they work quite well for the deck. They're a nice kind of creamy color. They're not super stark. There's no border on the back, so it's beautiful. But again, it's just a little bit big for me. And I do think this will be really cool taken down borderless. And as we say, you know, I think it'll just open up the artwork all the more. So I'm going to take the cream border off this deck, and then I'm going to edge it, and hopefully I'm going to edge it in colors to match what's going on in the title areas here, because I'm gonna leave the titles. I did honestly think about taking the titles off because it's a very Rider-Waite-Smith deck and I do not need them. It does also have keywords, but I feel like this is a deck that I just want to keep the titles on. Well, I picked up a pack of pastel highlighters to edge it in. I don't know if this will work or not. The only highlighters I've ever used on my decks are mild liners, and those are a bit different. So we'll see what these do. I also picked these up at Walmart for like 10 bucks, I think, $12. And they are Tombows, and they're like they're bright colors though. And while I think it matches, it might be a little too bright. So I did actually pick these up for another deck mod that I'm planning, but they might work for this deck too. So we'll see at the end which ones we end up using. For right now, let's go ahead and get started trimming this deck. As usual, we'll just do a few clips of the process. There'll be timestamps in the description box below if you want to click around, or if you want to just jump straight to the end, that's totally cool too. But for those of you who'd like to see a bit more of the process, I will include that as well. If you are new to trimming decks, I do have a deck trim tutorial as well, and I'll leave that linked for you in the description box below. So let's go ahead and get started. I am going to go ahead and trim all the sides off this deck, and what I'm going to do is actually trim one side at a time. I've mentioned this in every mod video that I do. I trim the entire deck on one side, flip it around, trim the entire deck on the other side, and then repeat with all the tops and all the bottoms. What that does is give me a really straight trim, which in the end not only looks good, because who doesn't like a straight trim deck, but it actually helps it shuffle better, because when you have a deck that's unevenly cut, when you shuffle it, your thumb and your fingers will catch on the uneven cards and it will make them fall unevenly. So you won't be like fanning through all the cards across your thumb. You'll be just catching on ones, and that's why they chunk up like that. So I do always like to kind of take a look at the back and kind of just, I don't give a ton of consideration to the backs of cards, to be perfectly honest, because I don't read with my cards face down. The only time I ever do that is when I'm working with the Celtic Cross. For whatever reason, that is the only spread that I lay my cards face down. The rest of the time I lay them face up. So I rarely actually see the back of my cards. I think that because I'm trimming off just the cream borders, I think that should put me right across the, up against the edges here. And that should just take off this outer black. So hopefully it will still look okay, but I'm not, like I said, not gonna worry about it too much because I don't look at the back of my cards. The other thing that I like to do is go through and look for the most challenging card. This usually has to do with title areas, particularly if I'm planning on keeping the title areas. So I want to make sure that I'm not accidentally cutting off any titles that I want to keep. However, these titles all have like a border, and then the black border. So I'm pretty confident that I'm not going to clip off any of the titles because they're all in this area here. And I'm not even remotely going to get close to that. The only thing that I'm going to get close to is maybe this yes or no on the bottom of these cards, but I am hoping to stay in the black, right? So you can see there's a black border around, here's a good one. You can see there's a black border around these cards. So I have to kind of decide at this point whether I'm going to go inside the black border or outside the black border. I'm going to hope that the printing is fairly even across all the cards. That's not always the case. Nothing against the publisher card creators. It just happens in printing. These are, you know, they're mass market decks, so they're being mass produced. So the printing is usually, like I can tell on this card, it's shifted more to the left than it is to the right. And that actually looks like that might be the case on all the cards. So when I'm trimming, I want to keep that in mind. That so far, all of these cards, these are all minors, yes. And sometimes I look at the difference between the minors and the majors to see if there is any difference, because sometimes they are printed in different runs. And sometimes half a deck will be printed in one run and half a deck will be printed in another, and then you can get variations in printing that way too. Yeah, it looks like in mine they're all just slightly shifted to the left, so I'm going to keep that in mind as I'm working through my trim. So let's talk real quick about the tools that I use. I always link my tools in the description box below in case you want to pick any of these up yourself. I've got my Fiskars trimmer. This is just the 5-inch one. I prefer this one because it fits in my space better, and it does make Oracle cards a little bit more difficult to trim, but now that most Oracle cards, mass market Oracle cards, are coming out borderless, I really haven't had the need to trim an Oracle card in a really long time, so it works great for tarot. I also have my little corner triangle here. I don't mean corner, my triangle, which I'm on like all white stuff. It's gonna be hard to see, and it's clear. But this just allows me to create a nice 90-degree angle, which creates a little cradle that I can slip my cards in and out of. It just makes the whole process go faster for me. And then of course I have my Katamaro Pro corner rounder that I'm gonna use at the end. And I'm not quite sure which one I'm gonna do, so we'll discuss that there. I also have some washi to help tape this down so that it doesn't move around on me as I am clipping things. So the first thing that I'm going to do is get my hair out of the way and figure out where I'm gonna make my first cut. Now I'm hoping that I always forget my ruler. It just would not be a mod video if I hadn't forgot my ruler. So this ruler happens to be the same width between the guide and the blade, so I can look at it, use it to help me visualize where my blade's actually gonna come down, which is just a handy little thing. So I'm thinking that's about right. I basically just wanna get off the border and leave as much of the artwork as I possibly can. So I'm gonna tape that there, and then I'm going to actually take off my sweatshirt because it's getting warm. Not literally here, it's not warm. I live in the Pacific Northwest and it's February. It's chilly and gloomy, but it's warm in my office. So I've got that lined up there, and I do want to make sure that it's kind of like lined up straight, as in flush with the top. And then I'm going to tape my little ruler down. You'll see here that that's going to create a cradle. I feel like it's been a really long time since I've done a mod. Can't even remember. What was the last deck I modded? Was it the Druid Craft? It might have been. I need some more washi. Thankfully, I have my washi basket right here. Sorry, shaking the table. That's a really big washi. You can use other things like masking tape and stuff like that, which would probably be better than using washi tape. It's probably cheaper, but I still don't have any of that at hand. I'm sure there's some in my husband's garage, but I'm not gonna go foraging for it right now. So we're just gonna tape that down and try to keep it as straight as possible. Need to get it in there straight. Okay. Now it's nice and straight. I'm going to double check. I think that should be good, but I feel like I want to go over just the tiniest bit. Like seriously, just the teeny tiniest bit. And once I get this lined up for this card, I can just use it for every card. So again, making sure that I'm lined up. And I'm real close to the edge, so I'm gonna hope that the printing is the same on all the cards. If it's not, I will show you what I do about that. All right, so we ready? I'm gonna make my first cut. Now, because this deck has extra borders around here, I may, and they're all different, I may get some funky things going on with that. I'm okay with that. I'm gonna roll with it. This deck is not like, you know, it's not perfect artwork anyway, so I'm okay with embracing a little bit of the imperfection. I think that that works well for this deck. So there's that one cut. You can see the first side. And so what I'm gonna do, always making sure my cards are facing the right way so you don't accidentally cut the wrong thing. Slide the next one in there and go ahead and cut and hope that it is in the same spot. Now I am retaining the black border around the outside, the really thin black border so far. That may not always be the case on all the cards. In fact, I don't think it's gonna be on this one. But if I don't cut them at all the same width, they're not gonna be even. So you can see, I don't know if you can see, but let me try to pull it in. There's black border here on this one. I cut it off. I'm actually thinking about actually large corner rounding this deck too, just to really soften up the energy. And if that's the case, I'm gonna end up clipping into all of these corners anyway. I'm gonna have to be mindful of the words, right? That's the other thing I probably should have looked at with this deck is where all the keywords are. I'm gonna hope they're all in the artwork space, but like this one, thankfully they repeat. So if for some reason it actually accidentally gets cut off, it's not gonna be too big of a deal. But you can see that one, I retained some of the black line, but not all. So anyway, I'm just gonna go through my usual process. I'm actually not going to film the whole thing this time because again, I have tutorials and I've done many mods like this. You can see this one lost the whole black border. Again, I'm okay with that. So I'm gonna finish trimming up this deck and I'm gonna do all of the right side. Then I'm going to flip the deck around, reset this, remeasure, and cut all of those sides and then basically repeat this process for the top and bottom. I'm not gonna stop and film all of that because again, it's the same process I always do and I don't wanna bore you to death, but here. See how nice and straight those are coming out? Beautiful. All right, so we'll check back in when I'm done with the trim. Okay, I have finished trimming the deck and you can see now it does not have the beige borders anymore. I think it looks kind of cute actually. It's a much nicer size for me. It's actually kind of closer to a playing card size, a little bit more narrow, a little bit taller, but I really like it. I think it's gonna be so much easier for me to hang on to. Now, a couple issues I found when trimming this deck, which I knew was gonna be the case, right? Some of these keywords that are around the borders, I got real close to. And some of the sides have a black line and some of them don't because, again, printing shifts, right? That's not a big deal because there's so much going on in the backgrounds of these cards in terms of like all the extra little flair, that kind of arts and craftsy border, that it's like not even noticeable when you're just looking at the card. I mean, you got to really like look for that. So I am just kind of going through now because I want to, like here, I got really, really close to goals and success. And there was one that I clipped into the word just a little bit, is that there's a couple cards and I'm just looking to see how many. There's one where I cut just the tip of the word saving off, which is fine. I know that's the word, so it's okay. And I don't really use the keywords on this deck. I mean, I think they're fine that they're there, but I don't really use them, so it doesn't really bother me any. So there's one. Oh, here it is. I forgot to point that one out, I think. So joy. You can still see that that's the word it says. So anyway, okay, so here's the other consideration. So these ones are all good. They're, you know, besides a few little ones that I got a little bit close to, these 3 cards have the keywords around the outside. Now they repeat. So my consideration was, and my thing that I'm trying to think about right now is that I originally was like, I'm gonna corner around it with a large rounder because that tends to make a deck feel a little bit more rounded. It tends to make it feel a little bit softer. And I thought that would be a really great energy for this deck. However, if I do that, I am definitely going to be cutting into some of the words on this card and some of the words on the death card, possibly this one. Thing is, this card is designed, or these cards are designed. This is not a straight corner, so this may not work, but I should probably use the small one, to be perfectly honest, just because that's going to cut off less of the card. So let's just see, because I can do the small. You can always go bigger, you can't go smaller. So I can go ahead and clip it with the small and see what that looks like before I decide. Now see there, I've just clipped off the little bits there. And that is gonna make these cards look a little bit nicer, I think. So let's do one that doesn't have like a, I guess it doesn't matter, but let's do this one. That has more of a border at the top. Always make sure you're putting it in the right one, because I have done that before, and you can't go smaller once you've gone bigger. So you can see here that I'm just clipping off the very small ends of that. If I go with the large one, I'm going to be clipping into a whole lot more of that corner design. So I think, as much as I would like to really use the large one and soften it up, I think I'm just going to go ahead and go with the small, because it's going to retain most of the work, most of the decoration, and I think it'll draw less attention to the fact that it's trimmed down. So there's the death card small, and you can see that I didn't really lose any text by going with the small one. So yeah, I think that's what I'll do. As much as I really wanted to do the big one, I'm just gonna use the small one because I think it'll look better overall. Here's what the backs are looking like. I mean, really you have to kind of look to see where it's off. Otherwise, I think they look fine. So I finished the entire deck mod, and it's actually been another day. They have sat overnight to dry, which was just kind of coincidence in how things worked out, because it got dark, too dark to film by the time I was done actually doing the whole process. I quickly ditched these markers, these big highlighters. This cardstock was just sucking up the ink, and the highlighters just didn't have enough saturation, I think, to penetrate it. So I ditched those pretty quick and went through my selection of deck edging markers that I've collected and tried to pick colors that were fairly close. So I ended up with a yellow, a green, and a pink in the Tombow, and then a blue Crayola. The reason I have the yellow, which is not a color I intended to do, is because this blue Crayola was the closest thing that I could find that I had to this blue color in this deck, and it was pretty much running out of ink. So I kind of tried to do less cards with it. So I just redistributed the pile back into 4 fairly even piles. There's a few less cards in the blue stack, just again because the marker was running dry. And so I added in that yellow color, but I think it actually works really well. So I ended up with the blue in the Crayola, and that's what that one turned out like. We have the, and there's no name on the Crayolas. It's kind of like a denim-y color on the cap, and it's just the Supertips. Then we have the Tombow in 772. For the pink, which I really like. It's one of my favorite pink colors in the Tombow. Go ahead and put that up there. And then we have the Tombow 243 for the green, which came out a little bit more fluorescent than I really wanted. But it works, and the only other greens I had were really, really dark greens, which wouldn't have worked. And then for the yellow, we have 991, which is my favorite yellow color for a true yellow. And I think that actually ended up working really, really well. I did edge the Creator and the Mother Star cards because, again, I do use those, but I don't keep them in the deck. So I'm gonna go ahead and put those in the bottom of the deck behind the guidebook as I normally do. So here's what all the colors look like before I mix them up. The yellow is a very deep yellow, kind of more in the orangey scale, which I actually really like. But I think that overall, like, they go really well with all the colors in the cards. I didn't like try to match the colors to the front of the cards or anything. I just like literally made 4 piles, like dealing cards 1, 2, 3, 4, just around and around. And that's how I ended up with my piles. So you can see here that they are all completely borderless now, and I like it. I think it's super cute, and it's such a great size for me now. So we'll just take a quick flip through a couple of the cards so you can see them. Overall, I think it's fine. You'll see that there's a couple places where the corner rounding kind of gives a slightly weird edge to the card. Like I said, I ended up going with the small corner so that it would be less apparent when those were the cases. Also for the bottom where it's kind of cutting into that border, that the multiple borders around the title areas, the small corner rounder really did kind of just lessen the amount that I was taking off. I originally had planned to do the big large one because I thought that would look really cool, really round it, soften it up. And I ended up going with the really small one, which makes it look really square, but that actually works really well with the way that this artwork is designed because we have so many borders within borders and boxes in this deck that it works really well with the small corners to kind of give it more of a square look. So I'm quite pleased with the way that it came out. I think it looks really cute. Let's give it a shuffle now that here's what the backs look like. They're all just, slightly different because printing, as I've mentioned many times, shifts from card to card. Let's see, I can definitely get my hands around them better, which is nice. And of course, because I've used the measurements, they do shuffle quite well because they are all pretty close to the same size. I do like to say kind of humanly possible. They're as straight as humanly possible because it's not machine cutting. I'm still cutting by hand. I'm just cutting by hand as carefully as I can. And there's a card that I missed the whole bottom of it in this green color. So let's just throw that on there really quick because apparently I totally missed that side. And the other thing is once you start shuffling, it'll become really apparent if you have missed any colors like that, because then the white will stand out. So I'm not seeing any more sides that I missed. So here's what the sides look like in their multicolor rainbow, which I think actually works really well with the back of the deck as well as the front. So yeah, I think it looks really cute. I'm really quite pleased with the way it came out. It's nice and more hand size for me, more sized for my hand as I'm trying to figure out how to speak here. I don't have anything that would compare it in order to show like what size it was other than the guidebook. So here's the guidebook, which was about the size of, you know, the cards. So that's, you know, about how much smaller they've gotten. It's not the greatest way to see, but because I cut the extra cards as well, that, you know, there's nothing to compare to in terms of cards. So in terms of a standard US Games deck, this is obviously the Deviant Moon Borderless Edition. You can see it's quite a bit smaller than that. At any rate, I think it's a wonderful, wonderful size. It's cute. I think it really fits the artwork. It really just, again, as we say, it really opens up the artwork. I will have to admit that about halfway through the mod, I was like, uh-oh, did I make a mistake? Because when I first started cutting into it, I was like, oh, I kind of, like, I don't mind the borders, and I'm wondering if it's gonna be too busy. Is it gonna be too crazy, too much on the table if I take all of that away? And at first I was kind of like, uh-oh, I made a mistake. And sometimes that happens when I do a mod. Sometimes as about, you know, a little ways into it, I second guess myself because I'm human and that's what I do. So let's lay a few more on the table, like we were doing a nice big spread here. And I think that despite my kind of uh-oh moment, I think that they do actually still work quite well, even though they are busy cards. And one of the reasons I think they work well is because, as I mentioned in the walkthrough with this deck, one of the things that I really focus on with this deck is the serene nature of each card being really at home in the energy of its card. I think it works. It still is holding on to that energy for me of having these serene figures amongst all the energy in their card, and we still have these serene figures. So I think in that sense it still works quite well for me because I'm still feel like that energy has been retained even though I've kind of set it free. So anyway, that is a trimming or modification on the Wandering Star Tarot. I am quite pleased with the way it came out. I actually think it's really cute. It's a much nicer size for me now so that I can actually, you know, get my hands around it and be able to shuffle it. So that's always great. So I hope you enjoyed this mod with me. Thank you so much for joining me, and I look forward to seeing you again soon in another video.